Welcome to BoxTheBase, your home for boxing and baseball. And today we have a jam-packed episode talking all about international baseball. We just had the first round of the World Baseball Classic qualifiers take place, where we saw Nicaragua and Taipei advancing onto the World Baseball Classic. And honestly, it's freaking amazing because the World Baseball Classic is baseball, in my opinion, at its best. International baseball on the world stage is baseball at its best. And I mean, some notable things to take away from these qualifiers is that every year that the World Baseball Classic cycle comes around, it just gets bigger and bigger. For example, you had two games actually in the World Baseball Classic qualifier round or bracket in Taiwan that got over 5,000 views. That would be Spain versus Taiwan, which got over 5,000 views. Not 5,000, 500. Let me correct myself. 500,000 views. And Nicaragua versus Taiwan that got over 500,000 views. That's a million views combined. And there's probably more because that was just on YouTube, which, by the way, has been fantastic choice by the World Baseball Classic. To stream these qualifier games for free on YouTube is one of the best choices they could have ever made. Because you don't need to have MLB Network, you don't need to have MLB TV, and you just have access to these games. And these are some high-level games, to games with actual meaning. While spring training is taking place, that sure, it might have some meaning for club teams in the MLB, but you can be watching the World Baseball Classic qualifiers instead that has a lot of high-level, meaningful baseball. I mean, these teams are playing for their ticket to the World Baseball Classic, which has a lot of implications. I mean, a team like Nicaragua, the more and more they keep making it to the World Baseball Classic, the more and more they're going to get eyeballs on that team, and the more they're going to be able to grow their domestic baseball in Nicaragua more than it already has been growing. It helps any team get there to growing the sport in their country. And I just need them to continue doing this every qualifier. Stream them on YouTube for free because it is a way to grow not only the World Baseball Classic and international baseball, but also these countries get known more through it. And I mean, it's just the simplest way because you don't have to have, like I said, MLB Network or MLB TV. And honestly, you are missing out on a ton of great baseball, like I've been saying, if you have not watched any of these qualifiers so far. Because, I mean, first of all, going into this Taiwan bracket, the Chinese Taipei team was the favorite because not only did they just come off of winning the Premier 12 at the end of 2024, but they honestly had the best team on paper. I mean, they had most of their good players from the CPBL, and I mean, they were just a favorite on paper, but you always have to play these games because you never know what's going to happen. And coming into day one, I mean, you had an action-packed day in day one because you had Nicaragua versus South Africa, which honestly was a very competitive game, very pitching heavy, defense heavy until the end, which honestly went into extra innings, and Nicaragua ended up winning that game 2-1 via walk-off. And then you had Chinese Taipei versus Spain, which honestly I thought was going to be a complete wash. I didn't think Spain had a single chance versus Chinese Taipei, but they just came in there and absolutely turned the offense on fire. They won 12-5, which is honestly probably the biggest shocker of the whole tournament. That was probably the game that shocked everybody the most. Because, I mean, you were thinking this Taipei team that just won the Premier 12 is going to come in here and decimate this whole competition. But no, it didn't seem that way. And honestly, I think Taipei was just overlooking their competition the whole time. Apparently, they rested a lot of some of their good pitchers and players from the Premier 12 and didn't bring the exact same roster, so that could also be a reason why. But yeah, it's honestly just very, very interesting. And they got steamrolled in day one by a, a Spain team that honestly wasn't really looking to do a lot in this qualifiers. And then on top of that, the other big shocker was Nicaragua beating Taipei 6-0. Up to that point, Nicaragua had been on fire, had been the best team. I mean, they beat South Africa on day one via walk-off. They beat Spain on day two via walk-off. And then they ended up closing it out to sweep the qualifiers 6-0 versus Taipei. Nicaragua, who honestly was probably the second best team after Taipei, but didn't have like the same offensive star power that Taipei had, was honestly the best team in this qualifier, which is freaking awesome. As you can tell by my hat, I am clearly a big Nicaragua fan because that's where my family's from. But honestly, it's just freaking awesome to watch these qualifiers. And I think it's just perfect for Nicaragua because they just rallied behind their manager, Sandor Guido, who, in my opinion, did everything perfectly. He had a strategy for every situation, for every moment, and he had his team playing fundamental baseball. They didn't have, honestly, a crazy offense. They struggled to score runs from the first two games, as you can tell, winning via walk-off only 2-1, both their first two games. And they turned it on versus Taipei in that last game, winning 6-0, which is honestly pretty surprising even to me. But they had great pitching, and they didn't even have the top pitchers. So for them to have great pitching was phenomenal, and they had amazing defense. I think versus Spain, they had like 4 or 5 back-to-back highlight reel defensive plays. So they were just playing fundamental baseball, pitching and playing great defense. That's the bread and butter of how Nicaragua wins their games, because honestly, that's what they showed this time around, and that's what they showed honestly last time at the World Baseball Classic. They showed they didn't have a lot of offensive power, and they showed that the way they're going to win games is by pitching and defense. I understand that in the last World Baseball Classic in 2023, they didn't win a single game, but they still stood out in the pitching and defensive categories. They just need to upgrade their offense, which I think is coming with help on the way. Hopefully, if the Nicaragua Federation is able to just bring their best players. And honestly, Spain, even though they ended up losing in the end in the second place game yesterday, and the time of me recording this Tuesday, they ended up playing the game and they lost. They honestly showed out pretty well, and I think they've advanced a lot, and they could potentially make the World Baseball Classic in the coming years because they have just keep getting better every year, which is honestly impressive for them. You know, a country that's not very big in baseball, but they did win the European champion, so that is championship. So that is honestly pretty big for them, and they keep growing on the international stage. Taipei, which is probably the most disappointing team, even though they ended up winning second place and they still qualified for the 2026 World Baseball Classic next year. They probably were the most disappointing team so far in this qualifiers because they ended up getting dominated and absolutely destroyed by Spain and then lost 6-0 versus Nicaragua. I think they just overlooked their competition and didn't bring their best team like they did at the Premier 12. And they were just missing, from what I heard, some of their top pitchers, that were just being rested for whatever reason. And I think that goes overlooking your opponents again, which you should never do in baseball because anything can happen at any given moment. It is never a guaranteed win. And like I was saying, some of the shocking wins was Spain beating Taiwan 12-5. Let me say that. Nicaragua beating both Spain and South Africa by walk-off was honestly another one. And then Nicaragua shutting out Taipei 6-0. And I mean, Nicaragua ended up being the best team in this qualifiers. And then you had the Spain versus Taiwan game, which ended up going to Taiwan. They ended up winning. It was still a pretty competitive game. I believe it was like a close score still, but Taiwan came out on top. Like they redeemed themselves from that first game, showed it was, a fluke. They weren't overlooking Spain this time around. They had their best pitchers rested, and they just went on to win these games. And I mean, personally, I kind of wanted to see Spain win that game because it would have been freaking just incredible. I mean, for them to beat Taiwan twice would have been just amazing for them. But Taiwan showed who they are, showed why they won the Premier 12, ended up with second place. Even though realistically, on paper and with the kind of squad they have, they should have been first place winners. But they just, in my opinion, overlooked their competition and got beat by teams like Spain and Nicaragua and ended up in the second place. And then so you had South Africa too, who I haven't mentioned a lot, but they weren't really impressive. They weren't anything to write home about. I mean, maybe they can keep growing and come back stronger, but they're just one of the not so great teams of international baseball currently. And I mean, just to talk about Nicaragua now that they punched a ticket into the World Baseball Classic, I just really hope that they're able to build this team. And I mean, there's a few options that I've heard floating around and possibilities that they can get. We already know they're going to get Jonathan Loaizaga. He played for them in 2023, so he's probably going to come back. Carlos Rodriguez is also probably going to come back. I would love for them to get Ismael Munguia, who was formerly with the Giants and now is with the Yankees in spring training. I think he would have played in these qualifiers, but he ended up getting signed by the Yankees and then was taken off the team because he wants to focus on making that roster. Even though I don't think he's going to make that Yankees roster, but he'll probably end up back in the minor leagues. So, in my opinion, I would have loved to see him play in these qualifiers. But he opted to go the spring training route. But I hope to see him in the 2026 World Baseball Classic. And the biggest name that they need to be looking at is Mark Vientos. Mark Vientos had a few options. He can play for Team Dominican and Puerto Rico, which, I mean, if you know anything about Mark Vientos and what team he plays for the Mets, which is going to have a lot of influence there from probably Juan Soto and Francisco Lindor. Lindor, who plays for Puerto Rico, and Soto, who plays for the Dominican Republic. He's going to have a lot of probably those two players in his ear just talking to him like, hey, come play for our team. And, but I think it would be cool if he came to play for Nicaragua because it would mean a lot to the Nicaragua Federation team and just the fans to have a big notable player like that. And he would add a lot of offense to this team. And then, I mean, it would just be a way for him to pave his own path in the international stage instead of playing on a stacked team where he might get less playing time if he were to go play for either Puerto Rico or the Dominican Republic. He would get the starting job at third base if he comes play for Nicaragua, in which, in my opinion, he should take that opportunity and run with it. And the other name that I've heard floating around potentially is Mauricio Dubon, who's from Honduras, but apparently they want to try and naturalize him and get him to play for Team Nicaragua, which would honestly be amazing. He could probably slide in at like second base, which would be fantastic. Another bat that would definitely help this Team Nicaragua at the World Baseball Classics, and would just upgrade their offense because that's what they need. They have pitching, and I'm not worried about their pitching. Then you would probably get Duque Herbert, who signed with the Tigers after last World Baseball Classic on the pitching side. Carlos Rodriguez, who plays for the Milwaukee Brewers. Jonathan Loaizaga, who plays for the Yankees. You would get all those guys, and you would get guys like Keenan Brunson and J.C. Ramirez, who played for them in these qualifiers. You would get a lot of these top pitching guys who've already played for them before. So I'm not worried about the pitching. It's their offense that need to be upgraded. And honestly, I hope we see the return of somebody like Chase Dawson, who came back. Well, not who came back, but who played for them in these qualifiers. Freddie Zamora, who's a minor leaguer for the Brewers, actually from here in Miami, where I'm from, and played at the University of Miami. He can slide in there and be so. I mean, honestly, I think this Nicaragua team is just going to keep growing and growing and growing as they keep appearing in international tournaments and they keep playing at an international level for years to come because they can just keep adding players and hopefully upgrading their offense. And then you have Taiwan, who's the other team that qualified, that I think is just going to bring their best. It's going to be a mix of a lot of the players you saw at the qualifiers right now, and then a lot of the players you saw play for them at the Premier 12, which are a lot of good players. So I think there's going to be a really strong team, and we'll see where those two teams end up. I mean, for Nicaragua, I think the hope is just to win out a game because they're probably going to be in that same gauntlet of a bracket that featured Puerto Rico, I believe it was Venezuela, and the Dominican Republic, and Team Israel. So it's going to be like a tough bracket for them. But, I mean, if they can get some guys like Mark Vientos, Ismael Munguia, Freddie Zamora, Chase Dawson, and guys that can just heat up, like we saw Brandon Layton just absolutely go off and rake in these qualifiers. I mean, if guys can just get hot at the right moment, then anything is possible for this team, and they really have a chance. I mean, I don't know to win the bracket, but at least to be more competitive than they were in 2023. And then moving on, you just have after these qualifiers, you have now the Arizona World Baseball Classic qualifiers, which is going to feature Colombia, Germany, China, and Brazil. And honestly, to me, I'm going to say straight up, I would like to see Team Brazil win. I mean, they have a pretty interesting team. The two notable players on their team is Dante Bichette, who's a brother of Bo Bichette, who plays for the Blue Jays, and then they have, I believe his name is Luis Ramirez, who's Manny Ramirez's son, who's able to play for Team Brazil because of his mom being Brazilian. So that's pretty cool. But honestly, it'd be awesome to see them qualify and get into the World Baseball Classic because they have a few players that could play for them who are currently minor leaguers and some major leaguers at at the MLB level that could play for them. Bo Bichette already said he would play for Team Brazil, and I mean they don't have a domestic league. And honestly, I think the more and more they keep appearing at international tournaments, such as these qualifiers, such as the World Baseball Classic, if they can make it there for the first time, and just other tournaments in general, they could end up maybe, you know, pushing the envelope to create a domestic league in Brazil because currently a lot of their players have to leave Brazil, go play elsewhere around the world in order to play baseball. And I think that hurts Brazil currently because they could be a lot stronger if they were developing players domestically, which they are not. And then you have a team like Colombia who's probably going to be the absolute favorite to win this. But then again, we were saying that about Chinese Taipei in the other bracket in Taiwan, and look at what happened to them. They did not end up in first place. So honestly, even though Colombia is the clear-cut favorite on paper, do not pencil them in at number one just yet. Let these games be played. Let these games speak for themselves. But they have a pretty good team. I mean, they recently lost Jose Quintana on the pitching side, but they still have Julio Tehran and a few other guys. They're gonna have Michael Arroyo, I believe is his name, who is a prospect for the Seattle Mariners, who currently has been raking in spring training. So hopefully he can transfer that over to just the qualifiers for that team. And honestly, they probably have the best team in these qualifiers. Then you have a team like Germany, who I'll be honest, I don't know a lot about them. I don't know a lot about their players, but I will say that they honestly might be in a little bit of trouble because they're going to be coming off of a longer layoff than, say, players from Colombia and even maybe players from Brazil. See, because their domestic league in Germany, the Bundesliga, ended a while back. They haven't been playing in actual games for a while, so maybe that could hurt them because they're just not fully there. They're not fully um, there. They haven't been in game action for a little bit, but you never know. That could hurt them. That could not. We'll see. I mean, I think in terms of this bracket, you have Colombia as a clear-cut favorite. Then you have Germany. China is a team that's probably going to be the weakest. They didn't win a single game from what I remember at the last World Baseball Classic, and they're probably going to be the weakest team here. But I think the way the order is going to fall after this is going to be Colombia, China's gonna be last, and then you're gonna have to battle out a second place game between Germany and Brazil. And I mean, maybe the experience of a Germany team that has a domestic league and they play consistently every year, a domestic season is gonna help them beat a team like Brazil. But I mean, it's just awesome to see like these qualifiers bring teams like Germany and Brazil playing versus each other. It's gonna create a big game of Germany versus Brazil, and you don't even have like you're playing baseball is what I'm trying to say. That's what I'm trying to say. You're playing baseball. Like the last time you probably had a big Germany versus Brazil game was in soccer, and now you're gonna have one of the biggest Brazil versus Germany games in baseball, trying to qualify for these World Baseball Classics. I mean, Colombia, like I've been a heartbeat, is gonna be the clear cut favorite, but then after that, I want to see a team like Brazil making it because they could have a really fun roster, and I really hope that this incentivizes, the Brazilian Federation to create a domestic league in Brazil. And I'm just gonna go and say that these World Baseball Classics and these qualifiers are amazing. I mean, if you didn't watch the first bracket in Taiwan, then you're just missing out on some great baseball. Because sure, you have MLB spring training starting, but like these are games with actual meaning to them going on right now while we don't have the MLB regular season going on. And you're honestly just missing out on some great baseball. But if you didn't watch any of the Taiwan qualifier games, then make sure you don't miss out on any of the qualifier games for the Arizona side, because it is fantastic baseball. I mean, to me, baseball is at its best when it's on the international stage, and it cannot get any better. I mean, a team like Nicaragua, hailing from a little tiny country, just absolutely dominating the landscape at the Taiwan qualifiers was awesome. And yes, I'm a little bit biased because it was freaking my family's home country. But then also seeing Spain, a team like Spain that just dominated Taiwan 12-5. I mean, they almost mercy ruled them, but luckily Taiwan scored a few runs, so then they closed the gap a little bit, so they didn't get mercy ruled and they played the 9 innings. But I mean, you just cannot miss out on these games because World Baseball Classic is growing the game every day, and these international tournaments are the biggest way to grow the game, because I mean then that's how a lot of these players get discovered and they make it over to the MLB. I mean, Japan has been doing it forever because they're the second biggest league in the world after the MLB, and so they're like the second, probably the best team currently. I mean, they won the last World Baseball Classic, but like to see players coming out of Germany like a Max Kepler, seeing players that are from Brazil, seeing players that hopefully are going to be from Nicaragua, like Freddie Zamora, Jonathan Loaizenga. If you have players from Taiwan that can make it over to the MLB, I mean, this is how you grow the game in an international stage. And you can watch them for free on YouTube. You don't have to worry about anything else. That's honestly, in my opinion, the best way to watch them anyways. Just throw on YouTube, on the World Baseball Classic YouTube channel, and you watch these games, because international baseball is amazing and you need to be watching this. So just to recap here, getting to the end of this episode, Nicaragua and Taiwan were the first two teams out of this qualifier to make it into the World Baseball Classic. Nicaragua swept their way in, winning 3-0, being the best team, and hopefully they can be even better at next World Baseball Classic if they get some offensive power from, hopefully Mark Vientos joins the team. Hopefully they can get someone like Mauricio Dubon, who, even though he's technically not from Nicaragua, they can naturalize him and make it happen. And then possibly just have a strong pitching, which they've shown already to have. And their defense just needs to continue being steady like always. And hopefully we see a few more highlight plays from them. And then you have on the other side, on the Arizona qualifiers, which haven't started yet, are going to be starting here in like about a week, I think. You have Team Colombia, Germany, China, and Brazil. As the way I see it, I think Colombia is going to have I don't want to say an easy time, because we thought the same thing for Taiwan and it wasn't easy, but they're going to be the favorites and probably going to win first place. And then from there, I think it's going to be between Germany and Brazil to win second place. China is going to end up in last because they're not a very strong team. So yeah, thank you all for watching Box the Base. Stay tuned every week for a new episode. Make sure you subscribe and follow me on every single platform: Twitter, Instagram, and subscribe here on YouTube. And yeah, just let me know what you guys think about these qualifiers so far, because honestly, international baseball is the best version of baseball in my opinion.